All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. It is Saturday, March 9th, 2024. Saturday, March 9th, 2024. And we are live. So I teach this fantastic online history course called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And I'm going to do a class preview of that 10-week online course right now for you all. So I teach the class on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a class today. We'll give you the information. You can register for this exciting 10-week online history course. And our class lesson plans are available right now at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, so when you scroll down the page, you'll see the information right here for the online class. We have classes Saturday, March 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th. We do the classes 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then when you scroll down the page, you'll see our class lesson plan. We have the flyer for the current class, and we have the class lesson plans for all 10 class sessions laid out. So you can see the type of content that I deal with. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place, okay? And I'm going to do a quick class preview for you and go over some of the slides in the class and some of the content. So there are over 200 slides that I'll show you or discuss in the class. There's 80 to 100 articles that we'll look at. There's about 15 books, 15 main books that we reference in the class. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. And we'll look at video clips of interviews I've done with some of our scholars like Professor James Small, Professor Kabahai Watha Kamene, Tony Browder, Runoko Rashidi, etc. Okay, and you can click right here and download the lesson plan. So we do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded, and you can go back and watch it anytime. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you can go back and watch the entire course. You don't lose access. So we see an unprecedented attack on African-American history and African history right now, whether it's coming from the state of Florida, and you see some of the stories that we've covered here on the African History Network show, as well as when I'm on Roland Martin Unfiltered, dealing with the attack on education, attack on African-American history being taught in schools. We see this article from CNN.com. College Board hits back at Florida's initial rejection of AP African-American Studies course and admits it made mistakes in rollout. We talk about the attack from Florida with the Advanced Placement African-American Studies class and the attacks coming from the Department of Education, Florida Department of Education. We know there was a march in Florida to protest the new social studies standards as well for middle school students that taught that some slaves were taught skills that they were able to use after they gained freedom or after slavery ended, etc. Okay, and they tried to present a softer side of slavery and that somehow slavery benefited some former slaves. So we dealt with that extensively on the African History Network show. This article here from Axios.com talks about how new rules are limiting how teachers can teach Black History Month. And this deals with the backlash of anti-critical race theory laws. There was an article from USA Today that dealt with mock slave auctions, racist lessons, how U.S. history class often traumatizes, dehumanizes Black students. And sometimes we see the way that these history classes or the way that different lessons pertaining to history are taught in some schools is traumatizing to African-American students. And then something that brought a lot of backlash was the, as I mentioned, the new social studies standards in 2023 coming from the Florida Department of Education. This article here from NBCnews.com, new Florida standards teach students that some Black people benefited from slavery because it taught useful skills. Okay, so we've dispelled a lot of this misinformation here on the African History Network show pertaining to that. So one of the things we do in the class, we go through and look at history chronologically. We look at thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Some of you have seen excerpts of the video that I did talking about the 1619 project and how a lot of what we've been taught about 1619, August 20th, 1619, how a lot of what we've been taught about 1619 is incorrect. And there's a lot of information to substantiate that as well. What's left out of the conversation oftentimes is the date 1526, because you had the Spanish taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina and Georgia to try to set up a settlement. And this was 93 years before August 20th, 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, even though August 20th, 1619 did happen. And at that time, you didn't have codified slave laws in any of the existing colonies. OK, and the first of the British, the first of what would be the 13 colonies that has codified slave laws is Massachusetts in 1641. This historical marker right here at Point Comfort in Virginia, Fort Monroe in Virginia notes the arrival of the first Africans in Virginia. And there's a good article that we look at in the class called "Much of What We've Been Told About Virginia's 1619 First Africans is Wrong." This is from VirginiaMercury.com. And those 28 Africans who were originally on a Portuguese slave ship called the San Juan Batista, they're going to be brought into Point Comfort in Virginia, and actually Hampton, Virginia, on the White Line and the Treasurer pirate ships. And it's going to be 20 and odd Africans on that White Lion pirate ship, an English pirate ship, that are going to be traded for food and water and supplies, etc. Okay, so one of the things that we do in the class, like I said, we go through and look at this history chronologically, and we look at the pyramid principle. Two of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small, when they teach, they talk about the pyramid principle. And if we look at a pyramid has three sides. The foundation of the pyramid is African history and culture. And it's African history and culture that gives us our VIPs, our values, our interests, and our principles. It gives us a cultural paradigm to see reality through. And it influences the two sides of the pyramid, economic empowerment and political empowerment. Economic empowerment and political empowerment. And the economic empowerment influences how we engage in economics, whether we use white capitalism dressed up in red, black, and green, or whether we use systems like the cooperative systems, which we have a history of using. And these are principles that we brought with us from Africa as well. So, a lot of times when I do presentations, I have to spend like the first 20 minutes just dispelling myths, dispelling misinformation, because there's so much misinformation floating around out here, even though there's an overabundance of accurate information. Check out this article here from the Washington Post called "Before 1619, There Was 1526, The Mystery of the First Enslaved Africans and What Became the United States." The mystery of the first enslaved Africans and what became the United States. This is from the Washington Post, September 7th, 2019. You know that 2019 was the 400th year anniversary of August 20th, 1619. Now, Spanish explorers brought 100 slaves to a doomed settlement in South Carolina or Georgia within weeks. The subjugated revolted, then vanished. But we also have to understand that African people were the original people of North, Central, and South America. Okay, so we look at work from Dr. David Imhotep, who was a friend of mine, and we know he's an ancestor now. He passed away in 2023, but he wrote the book, "The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence." And it deals with the African presence in America dating back at least 51,700 years, who were the Khoisan. The Khoisan have the oldest DNA on the planet. So we can't start looking at our history in slavery. Okay, we have to deal with thousands of years of history that leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. So when I put together the introduction to this class and it's laying out the curriculum for this class, because I put together the curriculum, been studying history 33 years now. I said we can't start studying our history in slavery. Even when we study the transatlantic slave trade, which is important to study, we can't start in 1619 or in the 1440s when the Portuguese get involved. We have to understand the history chronologically and deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who enter into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal, from North Africa in 711 AD. So I've been teaching this class on and off since 2007. It has evolved immensely since then, and I'm happy now that I've been able to put the entire class to lay out the course lesson plans ahead of time, and we have that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and you can download and follow along with us in class as we go through each class session. Now, this course not only deals with the transatlantic slave trade, but thousands of years of history that leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Now, this is extremely important to understand because your level of understanding of politics is directly related to your level of understanding of history. Your level of understanding politics is directly related to your level of understanding of history, especially, I would say, the last 500 years of history, specifically history from 1800 through, say, 1968, 1970, okay, up until today, but especially that critical 168-year period of history, all right? So we deal with that in this course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And in the second class that I teach, which is Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. All right, so you can register for this class. Right now, we teach the class on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a class today, and our next class sessions are Saturday, March 9th, the next one, and we have it here, right here on the homepage of our website. Let's go back to the website. How's everybody doing today? Give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a heart on this broadcast. How you like this type of information? We have class sessions coming up Saturday, March 9th, 16th, March 23rd, and March 30th, okay? And they will continue after that as well until this class concludes. And you can click right here on register here to register for this class. It's on sale $80 right now. It's a $130 value. And as soon as you register, you can watch the previous course sessions because they're all on demand, okay? All right, let's continue. Now, these are some of the slides, some of the actual slides from the class. It took a lot of effort to really put this course together, develop it to the point where I really want to get it. Now, August 20th, 2019 marked the 400th year anniversary of the 29 Africans who came into Point Comfort on August 20th, 1619 in what would later be called the colony of Virginia. This year was known as the Year of Return, as many African Americans were and continue to reconnect to Africa and traveling to Ghana and other West African countries. When we discuss the transatlantic slave trade, we have to first understand that African people are the original people of North, Central, and South America and have been in the land we call the United States of America at least 51,700 years. So when I say things like that, or when other, scholars say things like that, other historians, a lot of times people don't know what we're talking about or think we're saying the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen or what have you. No, that's not the case at all. Yes, the transatlantic slave trade happened, but you have to understand thousands of years of history leading up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay. And I realized this, years ago. even before I started teaching this class, I realized we have to deal with this chronology of history. So Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, on page 14 of his book, he lays out evidence found in Allendale County, South Carolina, by archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear in 2004. And Dr. Albert Goodyear and his team, they found 13 different types of evidence that thoroughly document an African presence in the land that we call the United States of America, dating back at least 51,700 years. Okay. They found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, Egyptian writings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups dealing with DNA and genetics. They found linguistics, paintings, skulls, skeletons, structures, and tools. Okay. They found 13 different types of evidence that thoroughly document an African presence here. Now, these Africans were the Khoisan. Okay. This is before Europeans come into existence. Well, let me rephrase that. This would be before any European civilizations, and this would be before Native Americans come into existence. We know we have Africans migrating out of Africa into Europe 50, 60,000 years ago, getting trapped in the Worm Ice Age, WRM, the Worm Ice Age. Okay. If we look here at this article from ScienceDaily.com, new evidence puts man in North America 50,000 years ago. New evidence puts man in North America 50,000 years ago. November 18th, 2004 from ScienceDaily.com. Radiocarbon tests of carbonized plant remains where artifacts were unearthed last May along the Savannah River in Allendale County by University of South Carolina archaeologists Dr. Albert Goodyear indicate that the sediments containing these artifacts are at least 50,000 years old, meaning that humans inhabited North America long before the last ice age. So these humans that they're talking about were the Khoisan. Okay, so who were the Khoisan, right? These are the short-statured Africans, derisively or pejoratively or negatively, derogatorily called Bushmen or Pygmies, right? Now, an October 2012 genetic study published in Science magazine found that the Khoisan in Southern Africa are the oldest ethnic group of modern humans, with their ancestral line originating about 100,000 years ago, with their ancestral line originating about 100,000 years ago. The Khoisan, formerly called by the derogatory term Bushmen, are genetically unique, and no other currently known population had separated so early from our common modern human ancestor, according to the report. Now here is a picture of a couple of Khoisan women. And there's numerous articles written about the Khoisan as well. And then we see in the Philippines, for instance, in Asia, in the Philippines, we see the original inhabitants of the Philippines are called Negritos, which are the short-statured Africans as well, okay, which are the Khoisan. So these Africans go all around the world, and they're also in the land that we call the United States of America. Today, we call the United States of America. The Khoisan live in mainly Southern Africa in territories spanning Botswana, Namibia, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. They are largely divided into two groups: hunters and gatherers, known as the Sans people, S-A-N-S, and keepers of the livestock, known as the Khoi Khoi people. Sara Baartman, also known as Hottentot Venus, was Khoisan. Okay, Sara Baartman, who was dehumanized and paraded around Europe in a freak show, in the early 1800s, and she was portrayed in scantily clad clothing. She had huge buttocks because she had steatopygia, okay? And it's rumored that it's believed that she also became a prostitute as well. Now, she was sold into slavery, okay? And she was sexually exploited. And when she died, we know that her genitalia was put on display also, okay? So this is Sara Baartman, Sara J. Baartman. And I made when in 2023, when the Essence Music Festival took place, and they aired on Hulu, okay, on Hulu, the streaming service Hulu, they aired the Essence live, okay. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 7 p.m. to midnight in prime time, they aired the Essence Music Festival live, the performances. So you got to see, you know, Lauryn Hill and, you know, the Fugees perform. You got to see, I think Eve performed, but you got to see Trina and Money Long and a number of different artists, right? But Megan Thee Stallion performed that Sunday, okay, Sunday, and it went into early Monday morning. I think she came on something like 1 a.m., all right? So there was some backlash behind her performance as well as Janelle Monáe's performance. Megan Thee Stallion was really over the top. India Ari put out some statements on Instagram criticizing both of their performances. I don't think India Ari's critique went far enough. Mine went way farther than that. You can check out mine on my Facebook page, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. But India Ari criticizes Megan Thee Stallion and Janelle Monáe for Sexual Essence Festival performances. So this was an article from okplayer.com. Now, in my critique, and this is the first time we've had these conversations here on the African History Network show, I referenced Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who I interviewed 3 times on the African History Network show, and she's the author of the ISIS papers, Keys to the Colors, right? Remember Dr. Welsing, okay? Dr. Welsing said, we're the only people on this entire planet who have been taught to sing and praise our demeanment. I'm a bitch, I'm a hoe, I'm a gangster, I'm a thug, I'm a dog. If you can train people to demean and degrade themselves, you can oppress them forever. You can oppress them forever. You can even program them to kill themselves, and they won't even understand what happened. Okay, so she's absolutely correct. All right, and this is what happens when you have people who've been stripped of their history, culture, language, spiritual systems, folklore, mores, etc. There's a good article on Sara Baartman here. Let's look at something here. This is from bbc.com. And this is one of the articles we use in the class, because this is 80 to 100 articles that we look at, and I'm constantly adding more information. So this piece here from the BBC is called The Significance of Sara Baartman. And I actually did a entire video dealing with Sara Baartman. We did a broadcast dealing with this. The Significance of Sara Baartman. This is from January 7th, 2016. Okay. So here's a sketch of her, Sara J. Baartman. She died December 29th, 1815. 2 centuries ago, Sara Baartman died after years spent in European freak shows. Now rumors over a possible Hollywood film about Baartman's life has sparked controversy. Now, whether or not the film happens is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the history that happened to Sara Baartman. Her brain, skeleton, and sexual organs remained on display in a Paris museum until 1974. Her remains were not repatriated and buried until 2002. Brought to Europe seemingly on false pretenses by a British doctor, stage named the Hottentot Venus, she was paraded around freak shows. And, you know, it is ironic that Sara Baartman was dehumanized in what are called freak shows. And oftentimes the term freak is attributed to African American women, but in a negative way to justify sexually exploiting them. So I'm not saying, and even it can be a double-edged sword when the term freak is embraced by African American women in negative corporate controlled hip hop. Not saying there's something wrong with them enjoying sex, but when they are portrayed as being hypersexualized, right? And then usually negative, pejorative, dehumanizing terms are associated with them to justify mistreating them. And the term freak can be used in a negative way. All the African American women enjoying sex is really separate from the conversation of them being dehumanized and sexually exploited. Okay, so we have to understand two conversations that are really separate. But when you study the history of what happened to Sara Baartman, and then you look at how our sisters are dehumanized in negative corporate controlled hip hop, it's like a 21st century freak show. And they think they are in control of the narrative, but they're really not. It's the white corporations behind them that are really in control of the narrative and allow them to do what they do and profit from it. Profit the most from it, I should say. So Sara Baartman, who was billed as Hottentot Venus, was paraded around quote unquote freak shows in London and Paris with crowds invited to look at her large buttocks. Today, she is seen by many as the epitome of colonial exploitation and racism, of the ridicule and the commodification of Black people, making money off of our bodies. But here we talk about really the sexual exploitation and sexual commodification of African people, specifically in this case, African women. She's the precursor to Nicki Minaj and Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion and Sexy Red and Sukihana and Ruby Rose. She's the precursor to this. Okay, so if we continue, let's see. Hold on, I'm going to get past this Beyonce stuff. Sara Baartman's life was one of huge hardship. It is thought she was born in South Africa's Eastern Cape in 1789. Her mother died when she was 2 years old, and her father, a cattle driver, died when she was an adolescent. She entered domestic service in Cape Town, South Africa, after a Dutch colonist murdered Sara Baartman's partner, with whom she had a baby, and the baby died. In October 1810, although illiterate, Sara Baartman allegedly signed a contract with English ship surgeon William Dunlop, D-U-N-L-O-P, and mixed race entrepreneur Hendrik Caesars, in whose household she worked, saying she would travel to England to take part in shows. The reason was that Sara Baartman, also known as Sara or Sartije, had what was called steatopegia, resulting in extremely protuberant buttocks due to a buildup of fat. She had extremely large buttocks as well as thick thighs, okay? And Europeans were fascinated by this, and large breasts, and Europeans were fascinated by this. These made her a cause of fascination when she was exhibited at a venue in London's Piccadilly Circus after her arrival. Quote, you have to remember that at the time, it was highly fashionable and desirable for women to have large bottoms, so lots of people envied what she had naturally without having to accentuate her figure, says Rachel Holmes, author of The Hottentot Venus, The Life and Death of Sartije Baartman. Okay. On stage, she wore skin-tight, flesh-colored clothing. Skin-tight, flesh-colored clothing, as well as beads and feathers, and smoked a pipe. Wealthy customers could pay for private demonstrations in their homes with their guests allowed to touch her. The rest of this, we talk about Sara Baartman in the class, okay, and then also somewhat in the second class that I teach, because the second class deals with history from 1800 to about 1970. The significance of Sara Baartman. Now, I think it was last week in class we talked about. It was last week or the week before we talked about Sara Baartman in class, and I dealt with something that we talked about on the African History Network show before. And I don't know how many people saw this or remember this, but there was a statue of Nicki Minaj at the Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. Okay, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. And there were a few articles written about this, and one article was written when about the wax museum in I think it was in Europe, and then one the wax museum in Las Vegas, if I remember correctly, because there are a few different articles written a few years apart on this. The statue shows her bent over, and it is a scene taken from the Anaconda video. The Anaconda video from Nicki Minaj, viewed over 100 million times on YouTube. And I'm going to try to pull this up here, because some of these articles they took down. Madame Tussauds, Las Vegas. Okay, this is some of the articles that were out. They took down, but I was able to still find some of these. Let's see here. But what happened was, some patrons going to see the exhibit were sexually abusing the wax statue. Okay, some of them were sexually abusing the wax statue to the point where they were humping the statue. You had, and I saw pictures of this in different articles that came out at the time, right? They were humping the statue, throwing money at it like she's a stripper. Like, let's see, let's go to some of these pictures here quickly. like this one right here. So they were throwing money at the statue of Nicki Minaj. So this is a scene from the Anaconda video. Now she approved of the statue and the position of the statue with her bent over, things like this. I don't know how many other statues they had of women bent over, scantily clad. But here you see this sister with money like she's at a strip club, okay, doing this to a statue of Nicki Minaj. Then you had other pictures, like you had other people disrespecting it, like this couple right here. And, you know, the woman is, okay, she may be kissing it, but it looks like the guy is trying to hump on the statue of Nicki Minaj. All right, so you had this right here. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what happens when the image of African Americans, in this case, African American women, is hypersexualized and projected around the world? Because the way you treat a people is largely based upon how you think about a people. How you think about a people is based upon what you've been taught about a people. What you've been taught about a people is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about a people. So when you study Sara Baartman, Sara J. Baartman, right, and how she was sexually exploited, you see that that's the precursor to the when we talk about a singular person, we see that's the precursor to a lot of what we see today dealing with sexual exploitation of African American women. But now it's even worse because you have negative corporate control with hip hop. So then you had this guy who thought, I guess he thought it'd be a good idea to hump the statue of Nicki Minaj. All this is very well documented. There were articles about this when this came out. Okay. Now, I don't know how many other statues got sexually exploited, what have you. And it got so bad, what happened was the museum had to put security guards around the wax statue of Nicki Minaj to keep people from abusing the statue. The museum had to put security guards around the wax statue of Nicki Minaj to keep people from abusing the statue. So you have to ask yourself this question. Well, if people think it's all right to abuse a statue of a Black woman whose image has been hypersexualized, then what would stop them from abusing Black women who they perceive to be hypersexualized as well? Now, this article here from USA Today, Nicki Minaj's Madame Tussauds wax figure has fans confused. Does Google not exist? Now, this is a later article. This is from January 8th, 2020. This is about the statue in Germany, Madame Tussauds in Germany. Okay. And this statue, they said, it displays the unlikeness to her. Okay. They were saying how it looked like her. So then they show, let me see, they show the real Nicki Minaj right here, a scene from Anaconda, and then they show the statue. Okay. I still don't know why, what would, out of all the poses you can have Nicki Minaj in, and even in the video, she ain't bent over the whole time in the Anaconda video. Why would you choose that? I know she approved of it, but that just goes to show how, at least at that time, she lacked critical thinking skills or lacked maturity to understand the ramifications of this. But why would the museum think it would be all right to have a statue of her bent over like that? Okay, so we take you throughout history. How's everybody doing? Give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a heart on this broadcast. Okay. And those just joining us, I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. We're doing a quick overview of this 10-week online course that I teach, where we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. The name of this class is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And you can register for this class at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, where we have a wealth of information. And you scroll down the page, you'll see that we have our social media tags. I have to add threads here also, because this, I think the AHN show on threads. I have to add threads here, and then also have to add TikTok, because we have a TikTok page, a TikTok channel as well. I don't use TikTok that much, but I'm going to start using it more. A 10-week online, a 10-week, the lesson plans for our 10-week online course are here, and you can download them here also, so you can see the content that we cover, and just click on register here to register for this course. But if you go back to the PowerPoint presentation and show you preview some of the content that we deal with. So we talk about the Khoisan as well, who have the oldest DNA on the planet, go all around the world. And we look at different archaeological discoveries that have taken place come out in the last 15, 20 years or so. This was a huge discovery that came out of the Greek island of Crete. Crete has been an island for more than 5 million years. This was an article from the New York Times, February 15th, 2010, on the Greek island of Crete. New evidence of very ancient mariners. Okay, on the Greek island of Crete, new evidence of very ancient mariners. On Crete, new evidence of very ancient mariners. Stone tools found on the Greek island of Crete over the course of 2 summers, archaeologists say are at least 130,000 years old, which is considered strong evidence for the earliest known seafaring in the Mediterranean, and calls for rethinking the maritime capabilities of pre-human cultures. Okay. And they say that this is causing them to have to rethink everything. And it really seems that this pushes the history of Mediterranean voyaging back more than 100,000 years, specialists in Stone Age archaeology say. So we know at least 130,000 years of our history has been stolen. Okay. We look at the lost Egyptian city known as Tanis Heraklion, which was lost about 1,200 years ago. It's built around 8th century BC. It was swallowed up into the sea about 1,200 years ago. And in 2013, archaeologist Frank Gaudillo and his team released their findings, and they found 64 ships buried at the bottom of the sea off of Egypt's, beneath the surface of Egypt's Bay of Abu Qir. They found 64 ships, 16-foot tall statues, 700 anchors, countless gold coins, and smaller artifacts. But they found statues like this, okay, and statues like this here. So before this discovery of the physical remains, Tanis Heraklion existed only on paper. Okay, Tanis Heraklion existed only on paper. We talk about understanding African culture. We talk about the co-ops, the cooperatives, which is based upon African principles, and it's these were cooperatives that were used by African Americans to fight for economic survival and gain some type of economic stability in various ways. Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard wrote the book Collective Courage, and she's one of the foremost authorities when it comes to the cooperatives. I interviewed her back in, I think it was 2014 on the African History Network show. Okay. And I read a lot of her book. I read articles where she's cited, where she's interviewed. This is her book right here. So this is one of the books we reference in the class. Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. Okay, by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard. And it documents our deep, rich history of the cooperatives, okay, of cooperative economics and the co-ops. And the name of this article that I cited here is Stop Saying Black People Don't Support Each Other Economically. Now, this is from news1.com, June 30th, 2014. Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard said the Black cooperative movement has always been parallel to the Black liberation and civil rights movements. We've mostly heard about the political side of the movement, but you can't name a major Black political leader that did not point to cooperatives as a pathway to freedom. Okay. And, you know, we look at the Free African Society. Okay, 1787, Philadelphia, Richard Allen, Absalom Jones. This was a mutual aid society. There was a good article from the Associated Press, Mutual Aid Networks Find Roots in Communities of Color, which talks about how cooperatives were making a resurgence during COVID-19. Okay, the nonprofit organization Town Hall Project created Mutual Aid Hub to track all the various collective efforts when the coronavirus began its rapid global spread in March 2020. Back then, it counted only 50 mutual aid groups, but by May 2020, the number grew to more than 800 in 48 states, driven by what the hub's lead organizer, Shivani Desai, called a, quote, grassroots explosion of organizing, end quote. While these informal networks have sprouted up in response to the pandemic, mutual aid organizers and scholars say they have existed long before then. Few are aware of their deep roots in communities of color, where such networks have been built for centuries. Quote, the concept of cooperating and pooling resources within a community is rooted in communities of color, end quote, said Margot Dalal, D-A-L-A-L, executive director of Detroit Community Wealth Fund and an Indian American woman. Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard, author of Collective Courage, said Black mutual aid societies date back to the 1700s. Free Black Americans pooled resources to buy farms and land, care for widows and children, and bury their dead. Many started credit unions when banks would not serve them. Sociologist and civil rights leader Dr. W.B. Du Bois wrote about enslaved African Americans pooling money to buy each other's freedom. Okay, wrote about enslaved African Americans pooling money to buy each other's freedom. So we have that in our history. Okay, and these are concepts that we brought with us from Africa, the whole cooperative concept. The African Union Society in Rhode Island was established in 1780 as the first Black mutual aid society on record, Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard said. The second was the Free African Society, which was founded in 1787 to provide aid to freed slaves who were denied resources by white institutions. One of the most famous examples of mutual aid are the Black Panther survival programs from the late 1960s, through which members distributed shoes, transported elders to grocery stores, offered breakfast programs, and more. In many major cities, more than half of the African American population were part of at least one mutual aid society by the 1800s. Well over half of the societies Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard has researched were started and ran by Black women who continue to be vital in mutual aid networks. Dr. Nemhard said she believes mutual aid is part of the history of all communities, but especially of communities of color that face obstacles accessing resources. Okay, so check out this article. abcnews.com had a version of the story, but it was originally from the Associated Press, apnews.com. Mutual aid and co-ops are a way for groups that have faced discrimination to have some level of economic stability. Part of my work is to remind African Americans that mutual aid is part of their history too, Dr. Jessica Gordon Nemhard said. Okay, so it's important really to understand that, because that is history coming from African culture, and these are elements of African culture that we brought with us to this country. Okay, there was a discovery in an article from yahoonews.com that dealt with the father of all humankind is 340,000 years old. The father of all humankind is 340,000 years old. And this dealt with a man named Albert Perry in South Carolina. And when Albert Perry died, his family got his DNA analyzed, and they found that his Y chromosome, which is handed down from father to son, they found out his Y chromosome dates back to an ancestor 338,000 years ago. Okay. There was an article from New Scientist, March 13th, 2013, entitled "The Father of All Men is 340,000 Years Old." And it talks about this discovery. And Albert Perry shows that his Y chromosome dates back 330,000 years ago, even though the oldest known fossils of modern man date back 195,000 years ago. This is shocking because all previous DNA samples date back between 60,000 to 140,000 years ago. This is causing geneticists to have to rethink everything. And when these archaeological discoveries come out, and discoveries dealing with DNA and all different types of things like this come out, they cause the scientists and paleontologists and archaeologists to push the timelines back. You know, Juvenile had the song in 1999, "Back That Thing Up." They keep having to back that thing up. They keep having to back the timelines up. There's numerous archaeological discoveries that we look at in this class. One of them is dealing with how we're older than we thought. New find pushes human origin back 100,000 years ago. Now, this is not from a conspiracy theory website. This is from NBCnews.com, June 7th, 2017. All the mainstream media outlets had articles about this discovery when it came out. And this deals with the discovery found in Morocco, okay? And it deals with Homo sapiens, okay? Modern humans evolved much earlier than previously thought, researchers reported. New discoveries at a rich site in Morocco show modern humans were hunting and probably cooking game animals 300,000 years ago. This is 100,000 years earlier than scientists have believed until now. 100,000 years earlier than scientists have believed until now. New discoveries and new dating methods show that, in fact, many of the bones belong to modern Homo sapiens, and they lived as far back as 300,000 or 350,000 years ago. The earliest previous Homo sapiens bones date back 195,000 years ago, and they're from clear across the continent in modern Ethiopia. Taken together, the findings show modern humans were dispersed across Africa long before anyone ever thought. Okay, the deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets. The more research they do, the older we get. And they realize that we're much older than we've been told. They realize they have to push the timelines back. But also, African people were here in the land we call the United States of America long before Native Americans came into existence, long before Europeans traveled to North America, traveled to the Caribbean. Okay. And this is what Dr. David Imhotep lays out in his book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. When we look at the African presence in Asia, the earliest modern human, Homo sapiens sapiens, populations of Asia were also of African birth. Here we are speaking of the diminutive Africoids, the extremely important and much romanticized family of Black people, phenotypically characterized by unusually short statures, skin complexions that range from yellowish to dark brown, tightly curled hair, and in frequent cases, like many other African people or Black people, steatopygia, okay, like Sara Baartman had. They are probably more familiar to us by such pejorative terms as pygmies, negritos, and negrilos. Similar peoples who live today in Southern Africa have been titled Bushmen. More accurate names for these latter people are San, translated as original inhabitants. Okay, so we see Africans throughout Asia, and when we look at the first inhabitants of the Philippines, right? These are the Negritos, the short-statured Africans. There's an article from face-to-faceafrica.com. And let's see if I can pull this up here. I think this is the right one. No, that's dealing with the Adamites in India. See what the name of that one, dealing with the Philippines. Oh, yeah, these Native Africans, I think this is it right here. These Native Africans were the original inhabitants of the Philippines. So this is from face-to-faceafrica.com. So how y'all like this type of information? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast, and register for this 10-week online history course that I teach. We get deep into this history. And like I said, all the sessions, we do them live, but they're all archived and recorded, so you can go back and watch them anytime. Let me close this video out here. Okay, these Native Africans were the original inhabitants. These Native Africans were the original inhabitants of the Philippines. Now, this is from October 26, 2018, this article, face-to-faceafrica.com. The Aeta, A-E-T-A, or Acta, A-G-T-A people are the indigenous black-skinned people who inhabit the remote and mountainous regions of Luzon, L-U-Z-O-N, Luzon, Philippines. The Aeta are under the bracket of Austronesians, groups in Southeast Asia and East Africa that speak languages belonging to the Austronesian language family. Austronesians also reside in South Africa, Suriname, Mauritius, and some portions of the Andaman, okay, the Andaman Islands, like the Sentinelese. The Aeta are also considered to be Negritos, name given to them by Spanish conquerors. They have dark brown to extremely dark brown skin, kinky and curly hair, which ranges in dark brown to blonde, small noses, dark brown eyes, and possess short height. Okay, so read the rest of this article here, but they show you some of the Negritos. They show you some of the Aeta. Okay, and these are descendants of African people. These Native Africans were the original inhabitants of the Philippines. All right, so we have the link here to register for this class. It's in the thread of the broadcast. Who still needs to register for this 10-week online history course? Now, the content is PG-13. You can use this information with your children also. It's engaging. We show video clips. We have book references. I'll show you the book references on the screen also. The class is not overly graphic. I don't do a lot of cursing or anything like that. Okay, so it's not that type of class. Okay, so we post information there. Now, here's an excerpt of an interview that I did with Tony Browder. And this deals with the purpose of the pyramids and why the pyramids were built. Okay, and we explore this in the class also. Let's look at this. And pyramid is a Greek word. Okay, contrary to popular belief, pyramid is a Greek word.
Kemet civilization fell in 332 BC with the advent of Alexander of Macedonia conquering Kemet and turning Kemet into Egypt. Egypt is a
Greek word.
Pyramid is
Egypt
Greek.
is a Greek word.
So most of the names of African places and things and people have been changed by non-African people. So if you don't know the original names, you'll never be able to understand the history, the culture, the science, the philosophy, and the concepts as they were originally created. Let me give you one example of that. Pyramid is a Greek word, which means little flat cake, like a pancake. The original word for that structure is mir, M-I-R. And the word mir means the place of ascension. So mir, there are no bodies buried in any pyramids of mir in the entire Nile Valley. None, zero. So anytime anybody tells you that the pyramids were tombs, that is a lie, whether it's an intentional lie or unintentional lie based on ignorance. Mir were always built over tombs. The tombs were underground. So the word mir means the place of ascension. The place of ascension. And the purpose of a mir was to facilitate the ascension of the soul buried underneath it into heaven, where that soul would be reborn. And they were very specific about where in heaven a soul would go to be reborn. So the first text which documented this journey of the soul into the afterlife was carved in the burial chamber of a tomb known as the Pyramid of Unas, right? So it's in his burial chamber where you find the oldest written religious documents in the world were inscribed on the walls of this particular tomb. That talks about the soul, that talks about the process for the salvation of the soul, that talks about the judgment of the soul, and the place where souls go to be reborn. So the framework for Western religions can be found in the Nile Valley. So it's important to reclaim the names. It's important to understand chronology and history. So in that context, Alexander of Macedonia conquered Kemet in 332 BC. And the word Egypt derived from the name Ha-Ka-Ptah, which is the temple of the spirit of Ptah in the city of Mennefer, which was later renamed Memphis by the Greeks. And so that word Ha-Ka-Ptah became Aegyptus, which was Latinized and became Egypt. That's how that word devolved, not evolved, it devolved because it lost its essence through the evolution of the word. And so once Alexander conquered Kemet, then he became so enamored by the 3,000 years of historical knowledge that he had inherited by virtue of conquest. And so he no longer referred to himself as Alexander, son of Philip of Macedonia. He called himself Alexander, son of Ammon, son of Amen, the unseen presence of God Almighty, which is a upper Nile Valley concept, right? And so the Greek rulers then descended from Alexander's line. And Cleopatra is the last of these Greek rulers. So Cleopatra, for all intents and purposes, Cleopatra was not African. She was not Kemetic in the literal sense of the word. And so my thing is, don't get caught up in Cleopatra. There are other personalities of more historical and cultural significance who we should be focusing our attention on. So I would bypass Cleopatra discussion and focus on Queen T, who was one of the baddest queens in human history.
Right.
She was one of the most powerful rulers on earth. She was the wife of Imhotep III, and their statue in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo is the largest statue in that building. And anyone who looks upon that statue could see the nationality, or the race, if you will, of who these two African people were. And it's very clear that we understand the chronology. Queen T was the wife of Amenhotep III. The son was Amenhotep IV, who changed his name to Akhenaten. And Akhenaten's son was the person that we call King Tut. So if you understand the history, understand the chronology, you can focus your attention on subject matters that are more worthy of discussion than Cleopatra. Not to dismiss her summarily, but Cleopatra is about as significant as Meghan Markle. I'm just saying.
Right.
Context is everything. Context is everything.
Right.
So look at, and there, thank you for that image of Queen T. Now, that's a very small image of Queen T. And what I would also suggest those of your listeners who live in New York, go to the Metropolitan Museum, the Met Museum, and you'll see an image of Queen T in the Met Museum. But that image of Queen T has half of her face destroyed. And there was an article that was written in the 1970s that was an attack against African-centered scholars. And Asa Hilliard brought this knowledge to our attention. The people from the New York Times had interviewed him as part of this same debate that folk are having right now about Cleopatra and African history. And Asa Hilliard showed this image of Queen T. And this image of Queen T, I love it so much because it reminds me so much of my dear friend, Dr. Francis Chris Wilson, with the afro, the stern look, and a woman who was clearly in control of herself and her destiny. So Asa referenced that face of Queen T in the Metropolitan Museum with half the face knocked off. So they had an opportunity, the New York Times had an opportunity to tell the truth, but they chose not to.
Right.
And so these are the games that we're playing with. And we have to, be very careful about who we get our information from. We should read everything, but read everything with a critical eye so that you can discern when someone is being deceptive. You can discern when you're being immersed into aspects of the truth so that you can ground yourself on the truth and not be led astray by arguments or false narratives that are designed to neutralize your strength, your power, and to waste time.
Yes.
We really don't have any time to waste.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that is, that's an excerpt of a fantastic interview I did with Tony Browder back in April 2023. And in this 10-week online course, I show you excerpts of different interviews. One of the things we do, we look at some excerpts of different interviews that I've done with some of the scholars, because, I've been doing the African History Network show for 14 years. March 10th, 2024 will be our 14th year anniversary of me broadcasting the African History Network show. It's been 14 years. It started March 10th, 2010. Okay, so I have tons of interviews I've done, tons of videos. It's a lot of information I have. So we cover some of that in the class. Now, going back to the PowerPoint presentation quickly here, then we're going to get out of here. How do you all like this type of information? Okay, and you can post your comments here. We look at some different African civilizations. We look at Abyssinia and Nubia, or Ta-Nehisi, ancient Kemet. We look at, Ghana, Songhai, Mali. But we look at civilizations that Europeans try to claim as their own, and Nubia is one of them, okay, which existed from 4500 BCE, before the Common Era, to 500 Common Era AD. And Nubia is basically the mother of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Ancient Nubia, also known as Kush, Kush, was a region along the Nile River located in northern Sudan and southern Egypt. So today, what is the northern portion of Sudan and the southern portion of Egypt was the area that was that was ancient Nubia. Okay, that region that was ancient Nubia, or the region of Kush. It was home to some of Africa's earliest kingdoms, known for rich deposits of gold. Nubia was a major trading port for luxury goods that came from sub-Saharan Africa, such as incense, ivory, and ebony. The first monarchy of recorded history was established in Nubia. The Nubians were also known for their exceptional archery skills that provided the military strength for their rulers. Kings of Nubia ultimately conquered and ruled Egypt for almost a century. Monuments still stand in modern Egypt and Sudan at the sites where Nubian rulers built cities, temples, and royal pyramids. In the 1800s, the Western world's interest in Nubia was awakened by the rediscovery of the ancient empire's monuments, which were reported almost simultaneously by individual British, French, and American explorers. Okay, so in the 1800s, you're going to see Europeans try to claim Nubia as a European civilization. Many of them found it difficult to credit indigenous Africans for building such a civilization. During the 1840s, German Egyptologist Carl Richard Lepsius asserted confidently that the Greek term Ethiopian, when referring to the ancient civilized people of Kush, did not apply to quote unquote Negroes, but was used to describe reddish skinned people closely related to the Egyptians who quote unquote belong to the Caucasian race. Okay, a reddish skinned people closely related to the Egyptians who quote belong to the Caucasian race, end quote. Because when Napoleon conquers Egypt in 1798, he's taking scholars in and they're studying Egypt, and then they are going to claim, and then 1798 going to the 1800s, they're going to claim that Egypt, these were Caucasians. Okay, they may say they're brown-skinned Caucasians or something like that, but they come up with these theories to try to say that no, it wasn't Black Africans, it wasn't Negroes that did all this, it wasn't Negroes that built the pyramids. No, these were Caucasians. They may be brown-skinned Caucasians, but they're still Caucasians. And then they do the same thing with Nubia and say that the Nubians were reddish-skinned people closely related to the Egyptians, but the Egyptians belong to the Caucasian race. Anything to say that these were not Black Africans. Now, in 1852, when the American diplomat Bayard Taylor visited Sudan and gazed upon the temple carvings of gods and rulers with clearly African features, he also found it inconceivable that they could have been created by Black-skinned Africans. Rather, he asserted, echoing Richard Lepsius, they must have been created by Egyptians or immigrants from India or Arabia, or an offshoot of the white race. AtlantaBlackStar.com has a fascinating article, 5 Ancient African Empires Besides Egypt that Europeans and Arabs tried to claim as their own. And we see this throughout history, and a lot of this history gets twisted around in the 1800s, right? So there's a good video. It's on TikTok and YouTube, things like this. This is of a European scientist who is confronted with the fact that this ancient Egyptian pharaoh, or Nasubiti, this pharaoh, and this one is Nubian, that this person was Black African. Okay, now it is true that the racial classifications of quote unquote Black did not exist in antiquity in ancient times. And we talked about this when we dealt with Queen Cleopatra VII and the documentary African Queens from Jada Pinkett Smith. Okay, These are the racial classifications that we use today, developed over the 16th, developed over basically the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. Okay, they didn't exist in antiquity. Check this out.
But the CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro: Shemai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shemai had Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shemai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bone, the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always heard the ancient Egyptian elites were Mediterranean type, and in this sense, Shemai is representing the society of the frontier, in which different ethnic groups were mixed. At the end, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Shemai was
The archaeologist in the video is Alejandro Jimenez Serrano. He and his team found a tomb on the western bank of the Nile, opposite Aswan. And as you might have heard, the mummy was called Shemai. So who was Shemai? Not much is known about him, but the little that we know is that he was an ancient Egyptian official who...
All right, so what happens is that the scientists, had a head-on collision with the truth, and it's things like this turn the archaeological world upside down. They cause the scientists to have to confront the truth that these were Black African people. These weren't brown-skinned Caucasians or anything like that, right? It causes them to have to confront the truth. We talk about the Olmecs in Mexico, and we cite some information from Dr. David Imhotep, the first Americans were Africans, who deals with the Mandinka Egyptian Olmec connection on page 82 of his book. We talk about Abubakari II traveling to the Americas as well in 1311 AD, 1311 AD, Common Era. We also look at there was another lost city of Egypt called Dazzling Aten, which in the last few years we learned about that lost city as well. Pharaoh Unas, Nusubiti Unas of the fifth dynasty. He has in his pyramid, you have the what would be called the pyramid texts, and these are like the oldest spiritual writings in recorded history. They're in the pyramid of Unas, of the fifth dynasty. He lived 2375 to 2345 BCE. So we take you throughout history, and one of the books we use Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder. We use this book here, and you just saw an excerpt of an interview I've done with Browder, and I've interviewed Browder throughout the years. Fantastic book. Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, but also Egypt on the Potomac, from Browder as well. And Egypt on the Potomac deals with how the layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon ancient African principles, And somebody commented here, awesome class. Thank you for helping us sort through the lies and reclaim our identity. All right, so if you like to, now this is just a preview of the class. The class I teach at our online school. This is just a preview of the class. So I'm going to come back to this here in just a minute, but register for this 10-week online history course. Go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. There's a 10-week online history course called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. I teach the class on Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our next classes are Saturday, March 9th, Saturday, March 16th, March 23rd, and March 30th. Okay. And then we have a few more classes after that. The class is on sale, $80, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch this anytime. So even after the course is over with, you can go back and watch the entire class. Okay. And we instead of 10 sessions, we're going to do at least 11, possibly 12. The course outline, the lesson plans for all 10 classes or 10 plus classes are laid out here. And I'll go through and update it periodically because we add a few additional subjects. But we take you through our history. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. So we deal with archaeological discovery that have come out in the last 10, 20. So we deal with Egypt on the Potomac and how the layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon ancient African principles coming out of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt, meaning land of the blacks. We look at the African origins of Star Wars and the Assyrian drama. There's an excerpt of an interview that I did with Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene, where we look at this information. We look at the Hannibal Barca and the Punic Wars, okay, and especially the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. We look at Hannibal crossing the Alps, crossing the Pyrenees, 219 BC, but the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. The Battle of Zama, 202 BC, where Hannibal Barca is defeated by Publius Cornelius Scipio. And Publius Cornelius Scipio takes the surname Africanus after he defeats Hannibal Barca at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. Africa is not named after a Roman general. The Roman general took the surname Africanus after he defeated Hannibal Barca. And we know that Africanus is Latin, meaning belonging to Africa. It's Latin, meaning belonging to Africa. We look at the 800-year occupation of the Europes of the Africans known as the Moors, who take the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa into Europe. And this is going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. Okay. And we see the rise of Spanish conquest. We look at Christopher Columbus, and Columbus is essential to the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade and the exploitation of indigenous people and the exploitation of African people also. Okay. So we go through and look at this history chronologically. We also look at the fake Willie Lynch letter 1712. Willie Lynch never historically existed. Wish we would just throw the Willie Lynch letter in the garbage can where it belongs. It's ahistorical. There are words in the Willie Lynch letter that didn't even exist in the early 1700s. Okay, the sentence structure, the syntax is not what they is not coming from England. That's a 20th century sentence structure, and their words from the 20th century, from the industrial and the automotive industry, things like that, that are in that letter. That was written about 1970 by Dr. Kwabena Ashanti, who's come out and admitted he wrote the Willie Lynch letter, and is Professor Manu Ampim, who I'll be interviewing later this month, who exposed Dr. Kwabena Ashanti as the author of the Willie Lynch letter. It's a fraud. Dr. Kwabena Ashanti meant well, but I think it's done more harm than good. Okay, so you can register for that course at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, let's continue here. And I posted the information here in the thread of the broadcast as well. You can also email us through the website if you have any questions. Right here where it says contact the African History Network, you can email us through the website right there. You can email us also, okay? And if you want to support us through PayPal or Cash App, let's see, we have a preview of the class here, and we have information for the African History Network show. Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Broadcast on my social media platforms. And we have our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Castbox, FM Player, TuneIn. It's about 9 different audio podcast platforms. Okay. And you can support us also through PayPal and Cash App right here. $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN app. Click on the link here. Takes you to our Cash App QR code. And I had to create this graphic because some people set up fake African History Network Cash App accounts. So these other ones out here are fake ones. Our tag is $ the AHN show, SHOW. And it may show my picture when you go to it also. But we have, click here on the link. We have the actual QR code. And this is our, you can support us through PayPal also, paypal.me/the AHN show. All right, let's go back to the slideshow very quickly here, and then we're going to have to get out of here. But the layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon the layout of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. And we know when we look at the Tekken is a ancient African symbol that deals with the resurrection of the African king Asar. We talk about Asar, Auset, and Heru, the first Holy Trinity, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And it deals with the mythology of Asar, cut up into 14 pieces by his brother Set. And it was his wife who found 13 of the pieces, put them back together. And it just deals with, it took her 70 days to do this. And this is why the mummification process takes 70 days. But the last piece, the phallus, was eaten in one version of the story by the Nile catfish. So she erected a Tekken, which the Greeks call an obelisk, which deals with the resurrection of Asar. But you have Tekkenu plural, that have been taken from Kemet, from Egypt, to other places in the world, like London, England, Paris, France, and New York City. There's a good article from face-to-faceafrica.com called Cleopatra's Needle, how 3 ancient Egyptian obelisks ended up in New York City, London, and Paris. And an excerpt from the article says ancient Egyptians called obelisks Tekkenu, and they were also used to tell the time in the past. Their pinnacles were basically covered in gold to reflect the sunlight. Historians say that obelisks represented immortality and eternity, and their long structure helped connect the heavens and the earth. Currently, Cleopatra's Needle is the name given to 3 ancient Egyptian obelisks, one in New York City, one in London, England, and one in Paris, France. However, they do not all come from one Egyptian site. Okay, the obelisks in New York and London are carved out of red granite from the quarries of Aswan, a major source of stone for Egyptian antiquities. The 2 obelisks were commissioned by Pharaoh Nesubiti Thutmose III for the Temple of the Sun in Heliopolis near modern-day Cairo, with each weighing about 224 tons and standing 68 feet tall. So we know that in the story, Heru is born of a virgin birth to the mother Auset, who's the wife of Asar or Osiris. And Auset means she of throne, or she is throne. Okay, and she was the first queen of Kemet, or Egypt. There were approximately 1,200 Tekkenu built in Kemet in ancient times. Okay, and with the different Neteru, Neteru for plural or Neter for singular, who Europeans would refer to as deities or gods with a little g. The attributes of Auset were, she was associated with love and fertility, and she was oftentimes depicted with a throne on top of her head, because what determines who is going to sit on the throne in ancient Kemet, it came through the woman's side of the family. Okay. Some people say matrilineal. Professor James Small says matrifocal, but it came through the woman's side of the family. Now, there were approximately 1,200 tekenu built in Kemet in ancient times, but only about a dozen are found in Egypt today. Many of the tekenu were removed from Egypt and are now in Istanbul, Turkey, London, England, Paris, France, Berlin, Germany, New York, Rome, Italy, Vatican City, and elsewhere throughout the world. The tekenu are now called obelisks by their new owners, and few know their origin or that they symbolize the resurrection of the African king Asar. So page 17 of Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder, he talks about this, and that's one of the books we use in the class as a reference. Okay, you can buy these books if you want to, but you don't have to buy the books to follow along in class. The word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. Mason means child of light and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun, which symbolizes knowledge. The term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet. Many Masonic temples were modeled after the temples of Kemet, places where light or knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. Okay, so the whole concept of going to an institution of higher learning and getting your credentials in a series of degrees, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, etc. That comes out of ancient Kemet. The liberal arts, the 7 liberal arts that George G.M. James talks about in Stolen Legacy, the rhetoric and the logic and arithmetic, things like this, that comes from the ancient Kemetic educational system coming from the Nile Valley region of Africa. And this is going to influence the European educational system, which was for the ruling elite, or maybe the top 10%. And it also influences the European secret societies or societies with secrets. Masonic temples are considered houses of light or temples of learning. The term Mason, which means child of light, is a direct reference to the highest degree of the Kemetic education system. The 33 degrees of instruction within Masonry represent a fraction of the 360 degrees of instruction that comprise the Kemetic system of education. Yet with less than 10% of the wisdom of ancient Kemet, Freemasons have held positions of influence and power throughout the world for over 200 years. All right, so we take you through our history and we look at different African civilizations. We look at African mythology, etc., and how it influences us today in society today. Things like the judgment scene, okay, where your heart was weighed on the scales of Ma'at, and Ma'at was the personification of truth, justice, righteousness, balance, harmony, order, and reciprocity. She was a neter that had wings and had an ostrich feather in her head, and this is where the concept of angels come from. The female winged deity or neter Ma'at, who is the personification of truth, justice, righteousness, balance, harmony, order, and reciprocity. And the 42 laws of Ma'at were the precursor to the 10 commandments. Okay. So then we look at the 800-year occupation of Europe by Africans known as the Moors. We'll look at things like Sinterklaas, which is the precursor, with Sinterklaas coming from the Dutch, is the precursor of Santa Claus, and Sinterklaas means Saint Nicholas in Dutch. But Sinterklaas had a sidekick named Zwarte Piet, Black Pete, who was a Moor. Okay, and this once again deals with the evidence of the African Moors all throughout Europe. We deal with things with like, why is Christmas celebrated on the 25th? Now, this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness, but nowhere in the biblical text does it state that December 25th, that Yeshua or Jesus the Christ was born on December 25th. But this deals with the rebirth of the Son, not the S-O-N, but the S-U-N. There was a book that I bought back in 2011 from the American Bible Society. I saw this at CVS Pharmacy here in Detroit, and it was called the life of Christ, the life of Christ, rediscovering how his life, death, and resurrection changed the world. And on page 55, they asked the question, why December 25th? Why December 25th? And it says, in Christianity's early years, people debated when Jesus' birthday should be celebrated. Some Christians were against observing it at all, as they did not want Yeshua or Jesus compared to Pharaoh and Herod, whose birthdays were commemorated. But in the 4th century AD, Common Era, Pope Julius I made it official Christ's birth would be celebrated on December 25th. Now, December 25th was also considered the birthday of the Son, the S-U-N, okay, the Son of God, the S-U-N. Using the technology available at the time, ancient astronomers observed that on December 25th, the days started getting longer again. They recognized the date as the winter solstice, which occurs on December 20th or December 21st. Usually it could be December 22nd, early in the morning on December 22nd. The winter solstice is when the sun moves into its lowest point in its 340-day journey. It moves into its lowest point. It moves into the constellation of Capricorn, and on the winter solstice, so you have December 20th, December 21st. Then the sun is said to stand still or be dead for 3 days, December 22nd, 23rd, 24th. On December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree northward, and you have an increase in the amount of sunlight each day starting on December 25th. So in ancient times, December 25th was known as the birthday of the Son of God, not the S-O-N, but the S-U-N, or the rebirth of the Son. The Romans celebrated the birthday of the deity or god Sol Invictus. The prefix Sol, S-O-N, means sun, S-U-N. Sol Invictus, which means unconquered sun. They celebrated the birthday of the deity Sol Invictus, unconquered sun, on December 25th, or what would be the equivalent to December 25th on that calendar at the time. This is before the Gregorian calendar was introduced about 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII. The day was also recognized as the birthday of Mithra, the sun deity of the ancient Persians, and also as the birthday of Attis, an agricultural god worshipped in Asia Minor. By choosing December 25th, the church avoided upsetting the masses. No one wanted their festival canceled, so the church simply combined the new Christian holiday with pagan traditions. So this is why you have to understand the history behind these celebrations we've been taught to celebrate, and the pre-Christian origins of Christmas. We find it in the celebration of Yule, which was a Scandinavian celebration amongst the Nordic people, or the Norse, which took place from December 21st through the end of January. We find it in the German festival honoring the deity Odin, O-D-N. Now, Odin, Odin, that's the father of Thor and Loki, okay? And we see Odin and Thor and Loki in the Marvel Comics movies, the Marvel Universe movies, and the Avengers, things of this nature. This was a midwinter holiday honoring Odin, And Wednesday was originally known as Woden's Day or Odin's Day. Wednesday has its origins dealing with coming from Nordic mythology. Okay, and Thursday was Thor's Day, coming from Nordic mythology, Scandinavian mythology. Saturnalia, the Roman festival of Saturnalia, in honor of the Roman deity of agriculture. The festival of Saturnalia was celebrated December 17th through December 25th. And the festival of Mithra, the ancient Persian deity in Asia Minor of Mithra, was celebrated December 25th through January the 1st. Okay. And the birthday of Mithra was also celebrated by the Roman elite. So all this history is connected together. Okay. And like I said, you know, and also, you know, we look at the movie Black Panther, because African culture and spiritual systems and mythology is all throughout the film Black Panther. Okay. There are 11 different African cultures that we see represented in the film Black Panther. Ruth Carter studied African cultures for 6 months, and she really did her thing. She deserved an Oscar for Black Panther. But the Panther deity Bast comes from the Neter, or the ancient Kemetic or Egyptian deity Bast, who at one point was depicted with a woman's body and the head of a cat. Okay. Ancient Egyptian goddess worshipped in the form of a lioness and later a cat. Bast, or Bastet, was the Neter of warfare in Lower Kemet, worshipped as early as the Second Dynasty around 2890 BCE. So we definitely look at analyze Black Panther, and the language spoken in the film Black Panther is isiXhosa, which is a Bantu language. Okay, just like Kiswahili is a Bantu language. And I had that slide. I saw that slide here somewhere dealing with the language spoken in the film. Yeah, and what is Bantu? Okay, Bantu is a group of 500 African languages that we see spoken from southern Cameroon eastward to Kenya and southward to the southernmost tip of the continent, going into South Africa. So isiXhosa. So Miriam Makeba, she spoke isiXhosa. Okay, the South African singer Miriam Makeba, she spoke isiXhosa. So when she was on the Cosby Show, she was teaching the children Xhosa words. Okay, and she had in the Xhosa language, they have the click sounds in the Xhosa language. We also deal with the fact in the class that Jesse Jackson did not create the term African American. We know the term African American goes back to the earliest recorded usage is 1782 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But in the Ballad of the Bullet, April 3rd, 1964, Malcolm X used the term African Americans. Okay, this is recorded also in the book Malcolm X Speaks. They have the transcript of the speech. He uses the term African Americans. So this is more nonsense, more, mythology, more just outright distortion of history that we need to stop spreading. As Reverend Jesse Jackson reintroduced the term African American, he did not create the term African American. Okay, so we go through and look at, Carthage and Hannibal Barca, the Battle of Cannae, as I said. Christopher Columbus is extremely important to understand, because Columbus, we see the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade under Christopher Columbus and where he goes. And we know that he set sail August 3rd, 1492. Later in the same year that the Moors lose control of their last stronghold, Granada, January 2nd, 1492. Okay. So all of that is related. And Columbus never comes to the land we call the United States of America. The closest he comes here is Cuba, which is about 90 miles away. He's in the Caribbean. He's in Central America, South America. He never comes to the land that we call the United States of America. We also discuss Queen Cleopatra VII, coming from Jada Pinkett Smith's documentary African Queens, as well as Queen Nzinga, Nzinga fighting against the Portuguese. Okay, because all that's important to understand. In these documentaries from Jada Pinkett Smith that are on Netflix have brought a lot of this history into the mainstream and into the conversation, and they work to educate a lot of people also. Now, here is a excerpt of an interview dealing with the Woman King that I did with one of my teachers, Professor James Small. And here we talk about the Arab enslavement of African people that began in 652 AD after they conquered Egypt in 642 AD. And we deal with what happened to the Black ancient Egyptians.
But there's a conflict between the Dahomey and the Yoruba land. Yoruba land is being invaded by the British, or by this time have been invaded by the British. This is the great burning of Benin and the robbing of Benin and all this is the great burning of Benin that we hear about in history. We don't connect it and so forth that we hear about in history. But there's a greater Yoruba war going on between the people. And these boundaries called Nigeria, they're not there then. People, and these boundaries called greater boundaries, they're not there then. People have other kinds of kingdom greater boundaries. And there's conflict between some of these kingdoms, mostly around trade. And there's conflict between some of these. But you got something else happening at the same time. As the Muslim, you got something else happening. Wars of genocide, as the Muslim cleansing is taking place in the Nile Valley. It's taking place in the Nile Valley. Mameluke Turks and the Seljuk Turks, and then finally the Ottoman Turks are the 9th century in the end of the 9th century, beginning of the 10th century. They're pushing millions of people out of the Nile Valley into West Africa. Out of the Nile Valley into Y'all hear what I'm saying? They're pushing millions of people. Y'all hear what I'm saying? Out of the Nile Valley, pushing into West Africa. Into Chad, in through Cameroon, into Nigeria, down into Ghana, Cameroon. This population through what is called Burkina Faso. This is the population called Burkina Faso of the people. Everybody always asks what happened to the Egyptians. Well, we're talking to each other here right now. What happened to the Egyptians? Well, we're talking to great number of those refugees. A great number of refugees scattered to the south and to the west. Millions of refugees because of the Turkish and the Arab ethnic cleansing that goes on for hundreds of years leading up to the 1400s. For hundreds of years leading up as the vulnerable population in what becomes known as the vulnerable population. And I know a lot of us don't go there with that piece, but you can understand who are these people? Go there with that piece. And so the kingdoms like Dahomey on the coast, somebody coming from the north, that's the northeast, have brought captives that they want to sell to another community because they don't need that expansion in their population. And this group of captives was either hostile to them or refugees that they felt was taking their space away from them. Okay. And that population, most time, that refugee population was at least able to defend itself, end up being caught in the trade. And it wasn't a trade at all. It was a war of genocide against African people. There was no transatlantic slave trade. Nobody was trading anything. People were being captured. People were being murdered. People were being raped. Villages were being burned to the ground. Okay? People were being slaughtered to get enough so you can make $200-300 in that day's money, which would be a couple of $1,000s in this day's money, or for one human being to do labor in the Western Hemisphere, where he was worked to death in 10 to 15 years and would be replaced with someone else, a process that went on for 400 years plus.
Absolutely. That's why I said you have to understand the chronology of history. And if you've seen any of my presentations in the past, you've seen any of my lectures, things like that, Africans are pushed south. They're pushed, we look at the Nile Valley, they're pushed to the south, but also pushed into Central Africa and West Africa. The Dogon, for instance, of Mali and Burkina Faso, the Dogon come from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, that Nile Valley region. The Yoruba, okay, of Nigeria come from ancient Kemet. So there's a relationship between West Africa and the Nile Valley region of Africa, especially ancient Egypt. This is why I took exception when a few years ago, Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. said that the pyramids in Egypt have nothing to do with Africans in West Africa. You know, African people migrate and migrate for different reasons. Some of the migration is forced migration. Other migration is voluntary. But to say that the Africans in the Nile Valley region of Africa have nothing to do with Africans in West Africa is ridiculous. Okay. Now, there was a Tony Browder sent me the video of this brother here, Dexter Caffey, who was interviewed, who talks about how he was blown away that he is related to Ramses III or Seti II, okay, a pharaoh from 4,000 years ago.
And we're now very happy to be joined by our next guest, Dexter Caffey, the founder of Smart Eye app, who recently learned of an eye-opening discovery of his own ancient past, all thanks to a DNA test. He is joining us now by Zoom from Atlanta. Hello, Dexter.
Hello, Emily. How are you?
It's so good to see you. Last time was here in Israel. We got to get you back here, but we'll have to settle for Zoom now. You have such an interesting history. Please explain what made you do a DNA test, and then what happened when you found out all of a sudden that you're related to Ramses III.
That's a great question, Emily. Well, about a year and a half ago, I traveled to places like Israel, France, and different places like that. And so what happened was people would always ask a normal question, where are you from? And I would say the States, United States. And the people that I saw in France would say, no, where are you really from? And I said, the States. That's all I know. And so that question stuck with me for a long time. And I just said, where am I actually from? I mean, I know I'm American, but where my DNA is from? And so I said, well, let me take my DNA test. It was a 23andMe DNA test. And I took the test and I was shocked when I saw the results. It came back and it showed that I was actually a direct descendant of the Pharaoh Ramses III. And I knew nothing of the pharaohs. Didn't know much about Egypt, but everything you hear about, Bible stories and things like that. So for me, it was a huge shock, and that's how I found out about it.
Wow. So obviously you took it deeper and deeper. You saw all of these synchronicities in looking at images of the pharaoh, how much you and even your brother look like them, and your own company has like an eye logo that looks like the Eye of Horus, unconnected to any of this. So what did this open up for you in terms of your own knowledge and learning about this?
I remember I was actually laying in my bed on Christmas Day, 2021, and I was going through my 23andMe DNA test, and that's when I saw that I was connected to the Pharaoh Ramses III. And again, I knew nothing of this situation. And so I looked up a sculpture of the Pharaoh Ramses III, and when I saw the sculpture, I literally screamed. And my wife said, Dexter, what's wrong? I said, this guy from 4,000 years ago, we look just alike. And she said, Dexter, wait a minute. There were no pictures from 4,000 years ago. I said, no, his sculpture was the Pharaoh Ramses III. His sculpture, we look like identical twins. And she said, let me see it. She saw it. She said, oh, my goodness. And then I continued to go over different sculptures, looking online. And I saw the sculpture that looked just like my brother. If you could show that on the screen, it'd be absolutely amazing. But it was, and I looked at the sculpture and I said, this looks just like my brother Joe. And I called my brother Joe and I said, I'm going to send you something. And he said, where'd you get that from? It looks just like me. I said, that's a sculpture of the Pharaoh Ramses III. And he said, oh my God. I said, that's over 4,000 years old and looks identical, just like you. So we were blown away, completely blown away.
All right. So more and more of this information is coming out, okay, and is going to cause a seismic shift in our consciousness. The biggest thing that we have to understand is that even though, yes, the transatlantic slave trade did take place, that is true, African people were here in this land that we call the United States of America, tens of thousands of years before that happened, number one. Number two, there is a relationship between Africans in West Africa and Africans in the Nile Valley region, especially ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, number 2. Number 3, when we talk about repairing the damage of slavery and the legacy of Jim Crow segregation and redlining, housing discrimination, things like this, but especially 246 years of slavery, it's the root concept of repair means to make you whole again, to restore you to a status before the harm was inflicted upon you, to restore you to a state before the harm was inflicted upon you. When we talk about repairing that damage, if you start your analysis with African people already enslaved, conquered by Europeans, stripped of their history, culture, language, spiritual systems, folklore, mores, family names, family ties, cosmology. If you start with us already in that institution that dehumanized us, you don't understand that you don't understand. You have to deal with who African people were and what African people had before our history was interrupted by the transatlantic slave trade, to actually understand on a much higher level the concept of repairing the damage. Because we have to reclaim our history, culture, language, spiritual systems, folklores, mores, names, cosmology, that cultural paradigm that gives us our foundation, that gives us our values, our interests, and our principles. And it's that foundation that influences our economics and our economic empowerment and our political empowerment. And every ethnic group in America uses their history and culture to fight for scarce wealth, power, and resources. Every ethnic group in America, largely, generally speaking, has their history and culture intact in various ways. And they use it to fight for scarce wealth, power, and resources. Ours has largely been taken away from us. There are elements of it, but as a recognizable system, as a recognizable culture, it's largely been taken away from us. Case in point, most of us still hold the last names of our former slave masters. And this influences the two sides of the pyramids, the economic empowerment and political empowerment. If the foundation is not in place, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You're not going to know what to do with it, and you're going to give it right back. This is why 97% of $1.6 trillion, 97% is spent with people that don't look like us, spent with non-African American people. And this is why I explain to people who just talk about reparations in the form of money and not understanding the history of the laws and policies put in place that have inflicted harm upon African Americans in this country, and don't realize that you have to correct those laws and policies that continue to inflict the harm and maldistribute wealth, power, and resources. Because once you spend the money, those laws and policies are still in place, inflicting harm. The disparities when it comes to health, infant mortality, the fact that our homes are valued at $48,000 less than comparable white homes. So that's $156 billion in lost wealth that African Americans have when it comes to home ownership. The study from the Brookings Institute a few years ago shows that. If we all got $1 million today, white people will have it all back by this time next week. And the only thing you would have done is stimulated their economy. Cash payments can be part of a comprehensive repairing of the damage. But cash payments by no means can be the only form of repairing that damage. Absolutely. You have not properly assessed the damage that was done. All right, so that's going to do it for us today. Visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. You can register for this full 10-week online course. We teach this on Saturdays, normally Saturdays, 2 p.m., 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I had a couple presentations that I had to do on Saturdays, like the 2 previous Saturdays. So we moved the class to Sunday. Saturday, March 2nd, I was doing a presentation for the Detroit Reparations Task Force here in Detroit, dealing with the case for municipal reparations. So our next class is Saturday, March 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th. We have something after that as well. So you can register for this class at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on register here. And on the next page, click on enroll. We do the sessions live, but all of them are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch them anytime. So hopefully you learned a lot today. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. Support the African History Network also through Cash App and PayPal. And remember, right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll see you at our online school, the African History Network. We'll see you in class.